Hello, thank you for joining me. I apologize that I haven't posted a little bit over this last year. First I had COVID earlier on, and then I had a couple of surgeries. My advice is don't break an already broken foot. And so at any rate, I'm back and I should be able to post on a more regular schedule now. I wanted to take some time because this is PowerPoint that's currently up, and in the last semester I had quite a few students that came and were struggling with PowerPoint, and I wanted to take some time to go over PowerPoint because it's actually a very useful program, and it's useful for more than just academics and business presentations. So in this particular case, I just want to have some fun. And this is typically what I will do when I'm trying to learn a new program, or when I have already know a program and I just want to have some fun with that program and keep my hand in, as I'll say something up and say, I'm going to design something inside of it. In this particular case, I'm going to create a new slide, and there was a book that was released relatively recently for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons called Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and that's for the 5th edition. I happen to like role-playing games. One of the reasons I like role-playing games is that it's a cooperative game, and it's some people have this opinion when they're looking at games, and it depends on the gaming group, but it's not really the players versus the game master. You're all together trying to tell a story. And so you want everybody to have fun with it, and that includes me too. If I'm running the game and I'm not having any fun because it's a lot of work, then I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do something else in my free time. So in this particular case, however, I want to set up a campaign in Ravenloft. Because I have still Ravenloft from the 2nd edition days of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, I want to make sure that this is 5th edition, and typically it's presented as Gothic horror, but it doesn't have to be. And because this is not real, this is a fictionalized account of what I would do, I'm going to put down that this is used for the channel. Now, one of the things that people need to know when they use PowerPoint is that there's 3 basic areas. There's the notes area down here. Oftentimes it's hidden, and so the students don't realize that it's even there. This has some advantages in when you go to print. If I was to go and print, I have options of saying I want to print all of the slides. Maybe I only want to print parts of the slides, and I'll get into reasons why you might want to do that later on. You also have different ways that you want to set up those slides when you do it, and you can set up so you have the notes. If I had notes that were underneath there, the picture is up here and the notes are over here. Or I can do an outline where I'll have a little picture here, and then the notes will be shown off to the side. In this case, we don't have enough here for this to show, but this is going to be for a campaign. And in actual fact, it's practice. This is the slide order. I can simply select the slide and drag it. And then over here I have the toolbar. The toolbar is going to have where your file is. This is where you're going to save and access information. You're going to open for it. If you, right above that is, and you can't see it on this screen, but you can turn on autosave. I typically do not keep autosave on. However, for people that are new to this, I would strongly suggest you turn on autosave. When you're typing, you can hit Control S on the keyboard, at least on a Windows, and that will allow you to save. Your insert is where you're going to put things into this. It's going to have screenshots, it's going to have pictures. We'll go into this a little bit more. You can even put in video or audio recordings inside of this. Design is where you're going to make it look pretty. I typically will tell students, especially when you're looking at something in academics or in business, to get your content in first and then make it look good afterwards. When I teach web design, I teach it the same way. You set up your templates, you make sure all of your links go to all your pages so that it is functional first. And then you make it look good. Because oftentimes you have, particularly in business, but also in classes when you have due dates that come up, you have to get this done efficiently. And so the most important thing is the content that is functional. Then you can put in, say, a placeholder picture. So if the content is all there and this has to go up by today at 1 o'clock, I need to have this posted. Whatever the website is, or the PowerPoint posted, or whatever needs to be done, I want it to be functional. I can put in placeholder pictures, and then later on, after it's been posted and people can go to it and they can use the site, I can go in and change that and find the exact picture that I want. But for those of you that have worked in graphic arts, it can take you a long time to find or frame, or perhaps draw and design and create the exact shot that you want. So first I'm going to put in all the content, and then later I'll make it look good. Transitions are how you're going to move between slides. You can do it automatically by selecting this box here and saying how many seconds you want it to move to. One thing, if you're going to do this, is make sure that you understand that most people take a while to read. So it's hard to find the exact time that you want to read. Maybe you've experienced this in a game where the text flashes by so fast, you're like, I don't even know what they said back there. Or you can set it up on a mouse click for it. You can also create small buttons that will advance, but we'll get to that later. There's animations that you can put in, and it's an entire part. There's the slideshow, which is how you're going to play the slides, and you can set it up so that it advances. That's what this rehearse timing and record slideshow with timings are, is that you can have it advance, say, every 10 seconds, or you can do it each slide might advance. The more text and pictures that you put on, the longer a person is going to sit and use it. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment, because many people do not use PowerPoint effectively. The review is going to have your spell check. It's going to be accessibility options, which is for people who might have difficulty seeing there, or for photos, or for search commands. I don't see that often used in PowerPoint, but I do encourage people to use it every now and then, because it will get you used to being able to work in a website. Particularly if you're new and you're saying, I would really like to work on a website, but I'm not sure how to do it, or I don't know what the process is for setting up a website. PowerPoint can be quite useful for that. When I taught web design, we did one set of the course, an introduction, where they set up the website they wanted to do in the PowerPoint. They would create buttons that would hyperlink, just like they would in a web page, so that you would go from different slides to make this interactive. Your view sets up mostly the ruler is what I tend to use it for. You can also use it to set up grid lines here for setting up pictures and for guides. I typically don't use these very often, but this is also where, when we saw the print, this is where you can see the different views for it. And then you're also going to have your help button, and then not everyone will have this. I have the Creative Suite, and so therefore I have Acrobat set up and linked into this. In this case, I want to go back to the home and just create the content for it. Now, in this, to set up the content, I was watching a couple of really good channels. And one of the channels was XP to Level, or maybe Level to XP. And it was a really good channel. But one of the things that caught me was apparently they're designing their campaigns in Word. Nothing wrong with this. I just don't want to write that much. So I want to set this campaign up as having an introduction, I'm going to set it up with a first act, I'm going to set it up with a second act, be good if I spelled second correctly. And I'm going to set up a epilogue. Later, when I get a little closer and I get a better idea of what the group wants, and for looking at this, then I'm going to break down the slideshow to be for sessions. I'm also going to package into here handouts, because we can look at this. You can put the handouts up, or if they want to have them because they want to write on them, we can print them out right off of at the gaming session. So typically what I will do for a gaming session is, because it's a cooperative game and I'm working with them, is that we'll have a pre-meeting before we actually meet for the first time. And either that will be done by email or through a Zoom conference now. Usually we would just do an email. Or we get together and sit down and kind of flesh out, this is what we want. And so one of the things that we will typically set up and have to decide on is, are we going to make rule changes or use optional rules? For those of you that are not familiar with the role-playing game, in this case 5th edition, but it's true to a certain extent for most role-playing games, is that you have your core rules, and then for people that are more advanced in the rules or are more familiar with it, you can start adding and subtracting rules. There's no problems to having to use your own home rules, as long as everyone is agreed that these are what the rules are. There are some people that they always want to have rules as written. And you'll see this and they will talk about it. Well, that's not what the player's handbook says. Now, I don't actually have to worry about this in my session because typically they do not get invited. And that's just because I like house rules. But every now and then, someone will feel very strongly about a particular rule. Our group has played in Ravenloft before, and one of the difficulties we had with Ravenloft is we had trouble playing as a group the Paladins in Ravenloft. Partly because, at least in second edition Ravenloft, a lot of the Paladin powers didn't work, or they were changed. And so people didn't find it to be as much fun, so we would end up talking about this first. We played a campaign a couple of years ago, I think about 2 now, where everybody was in the same knightly order. They were all fighters, knights, and we just played just with that. And they had a lot of fun, and we had a very successful campaign with 5 fighters. We'll set those up, these rule changes, on a sheet, and then before the first session starts, I'll push this slide out in an email and say, here you guys go, and we all know what the rules are. Typically, what I will also do is have pre-generated characters for them, particularly if we have new players. Pre-generated characters does not mean that you don't get to use your own creativity in it. It's just that being pre-generated will set up, for instance, you can get a whole list of languages, and sometimes people will pick out like a language like Dwarfish, and perhaps there is no Dwarf-ish need in the campaign, so they wasted a slot that they could have used on something else. So they'll give me an idea of what to do, or maybe they'll create the character and we'll create them as a group in that pre-meeting. And then when I push out the rule changes, I'm going to push out the characters ahead of time too. I don't really want to spend the first session at where we're going and we're just creating characters for it. One of the things that's worked out fairly well is I tell them to create a character at home and then send it in to me, and then we'll add it in for it. But I do want to look at the characters ahead of time, not because I want to change their creative aspect of the characters, but because I want to make sure that the adventure incorporates everything so that the characters are all equally useful in the game. Now, as we're setting this up, one of the things that I've seen students struggle with on an academic level when they're creating this to do their papers is that perhaps they're going to do a historical figure like Susan B. Anthony. And they have this idea, and I see the same thing in Word when they're writing the college narrative 5-paragraph essay, that you have to write it in order. You do not have to write it in order. There's a lot of different ways to write a paper. I typically write a paper by setting up the thesis, the topic sentences, and then I start adding information into it. I'm going to do the same thing for this. And the fact that you can organize and drag things very easily is quite useful to this. It's also useful because you only have to print out the pages that you want. And under the pre-generated characters, perhaps we've already agreed that we don't want paladins or druids. If you like the paladin and druid class, it's nothing against you. It's just as an example in this particular case. So that will give you an example for when I'm setting these up, that's something to keep in mind. Perhaps when I'm setting this up, as I think here, I'm going to change my title to be to content. And I'm going to put in a placeholder. I haven't set up pictures for these yet, but I want to have a portrait of the character. And over here, I want to have a hyperlink to the character sheet. And I'll come back and do that because these two are things that exist outside of PowerPoint. I have to set those up somewhere else. I'll set up a folder with several character sheets, set up this hyperlink by highlighting it, going down to link, and then it will link in to whatever the sheet is that has the character sheets on it. And then that way, when they come here, they tell me what their sheet is, and we do it, and we just print it out. I typically will create 2 or 3 extra. So if each of them is creating one, I'll create 2 or 3 extra. And that way they have an option if they decide, just don't want to do that, or there is a communication breakdown among the middle of them, and they come with duplicates, and they didn't want those duplicates, that's fine. So the goal here is to get the content in, and in a rough order of what you want. Now, one thing is, you do not necessarily want, let me come down to the first act. Well, introduction. So we'll do the introduction first as an example for this. You do not want every word that you're going to say on the slideshow. Perhaps I'll say a pet peeve of mine where people put everything that they want to say up on the slideshow, and then when they're particularly up in a class, and this would happen all the time over when I taught at the medical school, is that they would turn their back to the audience and read off of the slide. Now, part of that's because they're not practiced and experienced at public speaking. But part of that is that you're not putting things up here so that you do not have to practice what you're going to say. These are note cards that you're going to be showing people. So in an introduction, I'm going to have some way that they're going to get hooked into this adventure. And in that hook of the adventure, I don't want to do the typical they meet at a tavern. So I'm going to do that they receive a letter. And the letter tells them that they're going to see a guide. Oops. They're going to see a guide. That guide is going to introduce them. That's why it's the introduction. Introduce them to the cast for it. And then I'm going to decide where I want the rest of this to be. So I can come over here. I can say that I want to move from here. Actually, when I set up the letter, I also want to have the letter be that I would like one of the characters to be a noble. Character. Okay. To set up this Gothic horror. And as I do this, and I'm filling this section out, I don't need to have the whole letter here. That can be on another page, or more likely, I'll hyperlink it. And when I'm introducing this and talking to it, I want to have the information here not so tightly scripted. Instead, it's going to be what I've practiced and giving out to the audience. Over the last year, we've seen a lot more classes academically be on Zoom. it's still important for the instructor to be looking at the class. And I've seen that pretty well. What I haven't seen as well as I would do in an in-person situation is for the students to be looking back to the teacher, right, for the eye contact, or just don't have any contact there at all. But if you have the camera on you and you're busy looking at something else or playing what is obviously a video game or something else, not the best. And the same goes for this. When you're doing a introduction, you want to be looking at your audience, or you want to be presenting your slides out to the audience, not with every word. If I'm going to be doing voiceovers, that's fine. But if I put every single word on this, there's no reason to give it as a presentation. I can just push the slideshows directly out to the people. And perhaps that's what I want to do. But if I want people to listen to me, then I have to add some sort of content to this that is outside of what I've put in it. So what I will typically do then down here is say, well, I want to talk to one of the players, and I want that player to be this noble. But if I'm going to give titles, then I need to talk to the other players and give them roles for each of the players. And this is also a way to make the gaming go smoother. There's some similarities between classroom management and a role-playing game management. One of the things is to make sure that every person has a role. Now, the role may be determined by their class. They're a fighter or a druid or a cleric or a wizard, but you can have other roles in there. So I can have the role of, in classic game parlance, I can have the tank and the DPS and a striker, which is the person who does the most damage. And your striker, the DPS, is damage per second. That's how much damage they can do over time. And your tank is absorbing blows. Perhaps I want somebody who works as a shield. But perhaps I don't want those kinds of roles. Maybe I want a different set of roles. And this would be something I would talk to with the players. And say, perhaps what we want to do is have a noble who's answering the letter. The noble is going to have an armsman who's going to be responsible for making sure the party is safe. Perhaps I want to have some sort of an investigator who's going to, when we get to investigative be good if I actually spelled that somewhere close to correct. No. Let's try a V in there. What we're proving is that I cannot talk and type at the same time. Maybe if I was typing and talking the same things. And then when it gets to cases of they're going to the royal court, in the course of Strahd, you have when you're going to the castle, the noble's in charge and becomes the leader of the party. When you get into a combat situation, the person who's the armsman is in charge. When you're doing an investigative trying to find information, then it's the investigator character, doesn't matter what their class is, that is going to take over and be in charge of that. When you're trying to figure out where to go in the wilderness and how to get to point A to point B in the campaign, perhaps the survivalist is going to be the person that takes over those roles. As long as every player at the table has a clear understanding of their role, it's the same as in a team. Everybody should have an understanding of what their role is in the team and where the responsibility is. Now in a team, it's your paycheck that might be there, or a grade if you're in academics. Whereas in here, it's just fun to make sure that everybody feels that no one is left out, that everybody can contribute, that you have some reason to want to come back. Back before all the surgeries and things, I would hang out at bookstores, and one of the things that I would hear complaints about with sessions is that they went, but they didn't have very much fun because they couldn't have anything to contribute. Everything went to more experienced players. By assigning roles to those players, you can avoid that. One of the best books outside of Dungeons and Dragons, but one of the best books of role-playing that talks about having different roles, making sure everybody has a part, making sure that you have the pre-meetings beforehand that say this is what changes we're going to have or what characters we're going to allow, is Monte Cook's Numenera series, or the Cipher system. It's essentially a tri-stat system, and it's a very good game, I think, for introductory players. For me at this time, I find it to be a little pedantic because it is overly careful to set you up for new players. And I've been playing role-playing games and game mastering them for probably 25 years now, so possibly longer. And so therefore I tend to skip a lot of that. But it's still really good advice, and it's very well written. So that would be one thing to have in here. Typically, after the epilogue, I will have a slide that's really just meant for me. But on occasion, I've had this slide that people have wanted to, and I've pushed out to players as well, which is, where did I get the information? And this will usually have the various books in it. So I'll have something like the Player's Handbook in 5th edition, or I'll have the Cipher System book, and I have a potentially bad habit of setting up, well, let's see what went on with the text. Oh, because it went into I hit the key for, all right, hit the key for superscript. Okay. A little detective work there as I was typing. I have a bad habit of taking mixing things that I like from one book and pulling it into another book or an adventure. Particularly when it comes to Pathfinder and 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, there's not an enormous amount of difference between them, and so I might decide that I would really think that this would be a great opportunity to take the Summoner from the Pathfinder book and pull it into a Ravenloft book, because one of the things with Ravenloft in the classical sense is that you can't desummon. So that leads the Summoner to might have an interesting time. So that would be from the Pathfinder book, Player Handbook. And I'd have to retool it slightly for it, but not a lot. I've run Pathfinder Adventures with Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and I've run The Curse of Strahd with the Pathfinder group. You have to change the most differences in the monsters, but it can still be a lot of fun for it. But we've also played older adventures, and we've played things that we've created pretty much out of nothing. So there's a lot of different advantages here. If you're doing an academic paper instead of sources, you might have works cited because you're in an MLA style, or references because you happen to be in APA style, or perhaps you're doing Chicago style and you're going to have something like a bibliography. This is an important part, and what I will usually tell students is that, and I practice it when I'm here, if we're making this house rule and we're changing something and we're saying no paladins, well, paladins are in the player handbook. And then I'm going to put whatever page they are in the player handbook, and I'm going to put it right down inside of the notes, so that when it comes down to the end and I'm pulling it together and making it now look good for a submission on the sources, I don't have to go through every piece of the slideshow. Maybe the slideshow is going to end up being 40 slides long. That would be realistic. So instead, what I'm going to do is say, I'm going to go look at my notes, and I'll have a little section there in the area down here, and it will be bold so that I can find those sources and put them in quickly. One of the students that I worked with didn't put their sources in at the end, and then they had to go find all those articles again. That's inefficient, right? That's not that person's fault exactly, in that they were inexperienced with the research process, but it is make it for a lot more work, because you end up doing the research essentially twice. It's understandable when you're first starting out, but I like creating the new things. I don't like to go back and find all of those sources. So between now and the next time I sit down with this, I would want to come in and say, well, I'd want to get my pictures together, I'd want to find those page numbers, and I would put those all in. And then the next one will be in the design. If you have any comments, if you think that PowerPoint would work out well for you on a creating a campaign or setting up, taking notes for it, or if you have particular questions about using this structure in an academics or in a research or in a business presentation, let me know in the comments below. Take care.